All right, everyone. Well, welcome to week 2, day 2 of the Paraeducator training course. We're going to talk a lot about classroom organization today. Having a schedule goes a long way towards organizing a classroom. Classroom teachers and paraeducators often spend time analyzing the schedule of daily activities. We're always looking for ways to save time. Teachers need to assign time to meet the individual instructional needs of students. And the converse is that we need to minimize non-instructional time. Those transitions that can take up our needed instructional time. Activities such as announcements, lunch count, attendance, permission slips, and cleaning up after activities can often compete with instructional time. Teacher and the para should spend time developing a plan for handling these non-instructional activities. For instance, a classroom teacher could be engaged in delivering a lesson while the paraeducator takes role, that kind of thing. So the sort of thing that used to happen in the old time schoolhouses, you know, Johnny here, Janie here, we just don't do anymore. The next 3 slides are about eliminating wasted time. The para can help by assisting in the following. First of all, starting activities quickly and on time. Second, accommodating different rates of task completion. We talked a little bit about this on week 2, day 1, by having relevant supplemental work ready for students who finish activities early. These activities should not be busy work, but should be independent work related to the individual student's needs and skill levels. Minimizing open-ended discussions of student opinions and beliefs when this is not the direct objective of the lesson is another way that we can help. Students can become very skilled at avoiding the actual lesson by engaging the para or teacher in discussions. I used to have students do this with me when I taught high school. They would encourage me to tell another story, you know, this kind of thing, until I got wise. I got wise to it. All right, continuing with our study of eliminating wasted time. The para can also help by assisting with these things, not wasting time talking about discipline problems. Discipline should be dealt with as quickly as possible in a manner which provides students the least attention possible. So important. We'll delve deeper into that later on. Eliminating social interruptions. It's another way that we can help. These include social interruptions for the students and for the para and for the teacher. We should eliminate unscheduled discussion of personal items such as sports and movies during academic time. When the goals for a student include social skills or integration, an appropriate time should be included within the schedule, which does not interfere with priority academic areas. So we're going to a lot of effort to plan out the day, to game it out. So we ought to not sabotage our own plan by taking up time that could be used in another way. Okay. We could also eliminate wasted time these ways by being systematic and consistent in how learning activities are delivered. Also by planning and organizing instructional lessons prior to meeting with students. This is a key ingredient in effective use of instructional time. So if we were just to take the key words from this page, we've got systematic, we've got consistent, planning and organizing, okay? That's most of our job, is just those 4 things. We go back to part 1 of eliminating wasted time. We have this chunk here, accommodating different rates of task completion. Now we've talked about that in our pretest for this unit, but we haven't talked about exactly the nature of what sort of work we will provide to students who finish early. As I said to someone else in my life earlier this week, kids who finish faster than other students they're sort of in the same category as kids who finish slower than the majority of students. It is a type of special attention that we need to pay them. So planning goes into that. Spending some time ahead of time is going to hopefully eliminate having to spend that time on the back end, when really we need to be engaged in preparing the whole class for the next activity. Okay. Look at this young gentleman. He looks quite organized. We ought to organize our lessons. Using complete lesson plans to set up and deliver instructional lessons has several advantages. Now, we know we can't plan out every single little minute of the day, but we can, to a general degree, give a schedule that is realistic. Organizing lessons allows the para to prepare for the lesson before it starts, practicing if necessary. Sometimes we practice with the classroom teacher. This allows the para to assemble needed materials, get all the stuff ready, and supplies so that the lesson is not interrupted. The lesson should include step-by-step instructions on carrying out the lesson, which improves the flow of the instructional activities. So once you move into education, you're going to kind of see behind the curtain. So if you think about all the things you saw in elementary school and high school and college, university, you were always just seeing one side of the coin. Back of the coin, there were always instructions to the instructor. We are constantly telling ourselves what we should do next, although it appears we're just telling the whole class what they should do next. Organizing lessons allows for planning of supplemental materials or activities of the kind that we were just talking about a moment ago. It also provides a clear organizational structure for both the instructional assistant and the student, and the lesson plan should provide a convenient method to record student responses or progress. Yes, recording is another huge part of our job. And in this case, recording usually just means writing down. Okay. Here's an idea for monitoring use of classroom time. We can use a graphic organizer, right? We can use an observation chart to monitor how you stay on schedule and start learning activities. This is a good way to sort of keep track of what has happened so that you can begin to chart trends and see how things are generally going. You know, if you get a series of 7, 14, 21, 28 of these, then you can draw some real conclusions. You know, you might say, it turns out that activity number 2, we started late 50% of the time. So let's see if we can take in some of the slack right there. Small groups, working in small groups. One of the main challenges for classroom teachers and paraeducators is finding ways to make instructional activities more effective and efficient. Instruction in small groups increases the amount of instructional time that the teacher or IA has to spend with each student during the lesson. So we've talked a couple of times now about changing that ratio, that educator to student ratio. Small groups is a great way to do that. This provides a qualitative advantage to the education that these students are getting. It allows for increased interaction between the teacher or the para and the students. Students feel more comfortable in asking questions, they respond more frequently, and they receive more corrective feedback, really adding that value to education. Students are also less likely to be distracted by alternative activities. Small groups are also important in organizing the classroom because they allow multiple activities to occur simultaneously. Yesterday, we looked at a number of different classroom designs, and we could see how some of them were more accommodating for different types of activities occurring simultaneously than others. When you're working in small groups, instructional activities can be tailored more specifically to the needs of the students in the group. Differentiation of instruction is another way to put this. And that is something that's very, very hot in education these days, differentiation of instruction. So why do we have these small groups? They're set up for a number of purposes, such as reinforcing learning, which has been introduced in previous learning activities. Also providing additional corrective and supportive feedback to students while they are in the process of mastering a skill. Small groups can promote discussion among students and between students and the educator. They can promote communication skills. The students have more opportunities to communicate with each other and with the adults. They can develop cooperation and introduce skills needed by one or more students. Okay, let's go back to developing cooperation for a moment. I instruct at a university, and at that university, at the undergraduate level, so we're talking when students are about 19 to 22, 23, 26, 27, whatever it might be. Education is squarely focused on group work. You've got things like project-based learning, problem-based learning, these kinds of things where collaboration and cooperation are necessary, with the end goal in mind that when these students go to work after, be it right after high school or right after college, they will be in these situations where they need to collaborate with people all the time. And so teaching them this soft skill, this workplace skill, is something that we start doing when they're quite young. Got to learn how to get along with people, tolerate everyone, or maybe better than tolerate, because that is what the workplace of today and tomorrow looks like. Okay, how do we set up these groups? In general, I'll give you a personal anecdote. In general, when I set up groups, I try to make it as fair as possible by not allowing myself to create the groups. I also don't allow the students to create the groups because that also leads to a certain kind of bias. But I usually let the computer do it for me. I either use a random number generator, assign each student a number, use a random number generator, or if I'm doing a distance learning course like this one, I will create breakout rooms and allow the software to automatically sort students into these rooms. But when you're dealing with things, I mainly teach adults. When you're dealing with things that are, with students that are younger, you're often concerned with behavior issues, developmental stages, things like that. So teachers often rely on a variety of strategies for assigning students to groups. One strategy is heterogeneous ability levels. So heterogeneous means different. Groups are selected so that they include students of all ability levels and backgrounds. These can promote sharing of ideas, integration, and cooperation. We do want the students, to some degree, to scaffold each other, to help instruct each other. So a heterogeneous ability level group is a good way to create a context for that to happen. They might be created, a group might be created by social skill grouping, where students are grouped in order to create an advantageous setting for developing social skills, right? Introverted students, extroverted students, they both have their own needs, and the educators who work closely with them will pick up on that and may put them into various groups to meet these needs. Integration. In this schema, groups are formed to allow selected students to be integrated with other students in the classroom. This happens at the college level too. Yeah. This provides the opportunity to learn from students' individual differences. This is also done to integrate students who are isolated. So it can be, we could be talking about social isolation. We could be talking about self-isolation, a number of different things. We can also group by curriculum or task. Under this one, students are assigned to groups based on where they are in the curriculum. So if your curriculum is a little bit flexible, so probably be for the higher grades, later middle school, junior high, high school, you may have some leeway. You may have students completing things at different times. So you can group them up based on that. Students are grouped so that they may work on similar skills. This is often done for the convenience of the group leader. All right. We mentioned that we wanted to be able to make these groups efficient and effective earlier. Random grouping, I'm a fan. In random grouping, new groups are formed by randomly assigning students to groups. The opposite is enjoyment grouping, whereas we notice that some groups of students enjoy working together and are productive. Yeah, sometimes you will assign students to a group, and they would need to stand up and walk to another location to join that group, and they simply don't. So we can either really force something to happen, or we can go with it and see how that works out. Small instructional groups can be a highly effective method of instruction. I think we're seeing that more and more. In other words, educators are acknowledging that more and more these days. But student groups can also waste teachers' and students' time if they are poorly organized and managed. So they do require management. It's not simply, here's your assignment, see you in 20 minutes, right? But we're always checking in with the groups. In my online classes, I'm always cycling through the groups and checking in on everyone to make sure they're okay. In order to be effective, the size, duration, length of time, and composition of the group must match the task. Okay. Also, the group activity must be carefully planned and communicated to the students. Giving good instructions, good directions is key to their success. Just as giving the right amount of time to complete something is. What about the size of groups? Groups usually range from 2 to 6 students. Small groups of 2 to 3 students have several advantages. I like to make groups of 3, groups of 3 or 4. 5 is a bit much, in my view. Larger groups, though, have other advantages. They allow for more integration and sharing a larger number of ideas. So you might perceive that this would slow down the working process. It really depends on your group. How about group duration? These terms are going to come up again. You can trust me. Group duration is the length of time which a particular group of students remain together. It varies greatly depending on the characteristics of the students and the type of task assigned to the group. Some groups might be assigned to research a topic and develop a report. This is a task that could take weeks to complete. Other groups might be formed for one day or one class period to complete a practice or review activity. And decisions about when to change group composition are often made by the teacher based on the purpose of the group. So we in general don't allow the students to self-select for groups, and we do sometimes use a heavy hand and move students from one group to another. Okay, in our pretest, we had a question to the effect of students don't need to be taught how to work in groups because they already know how. And if you chose false for that, you chose correctly. One key to effective groups is to recognize that students need to learn the skills necessary to work in groups. These skills must be identified and specifically taught to students. These are some basic group skills: identifying the purposes of the group, taking turns, cooperative behavior, very important, presenting practice materials, following directions, correcting errors, providing supportive comments and assistance, and recording performance. Specific instruction and practice are required for these group skills, just like other classroom skills and knowledge. Students need the opportunity to learn necessary knowledge and group skills in steps like the following. First, the teacher identifies and explains skills necessary to work in groups. Then the teacher models the behavior, probably with one of us, with a paraeducator. Students practice working first in small groups with well-defined activities. Next, the teacher and the paras or the paras provide clear knowledge of the expected outcomes of the group activity. Then the educator reinforces students using group skills. Next, the students move to larger and more complex groups as skills increase. So we're starting with a very finite task. You know, it could be something very simple, but something you know is not going to take the students a long time to do. And we use that as a model for developing the skills to work with more complex tasks. Okay. This is something teachers often worry about. Was I clear when I said that? The effectiveness of group activities is dependent upon the clarity of the directions provided to the students. If students don't know what they're supposed to be doing, or if they're unsure, it's going to lead to difficulties. As we noted earlier, the teacher and the para must clarify the purpose of the group and the activities to be completed. They also need to monitor and support students working in groups. Students might not want to say, "Excuse me, I don't understand." They might not want to say that. It can be embarrassing. So if we're moving around and monitoring the groups, checking in with folks, reading facial expressions, right? This is a good way to mitigate for that, to try and help those who don't necessarily want to speak up. All right, these are some things that group members should do. Should know the purpose of the group. That's up to us to tell them. They should know the rules for the group activity, also up to us. They should have a way to contribute to the group activity. This is up to us and our planning of the activity. And they should have skills for working in groups or the opportunity to learn and practice these skills. Let's talk a bit about actively involving all group members. Group activities must actively involve all members of the group. One of the main purposes of small group activities is to increase the amount of time students spend actively interacting with the learning material and increase the amount of interaction with the teacher, the para, the educators. During group activities, it's important that all members of the group have an important and identified role. We don't want anyone saying, "I don't know what I'm doing in this group," right? To themselves or to us. It's important that leadership of the group is shared when it's a peer group activity. And the success of the group should be dependent on all members of the group. Again, this is the kind of thing that all the way up until adulthood, especially this last criterion, it's very hard to ensure. It's very hard to enforce. There are some very creative ways to do it. We could talk about that later. But every member of a group needs to feel that they are an essential member of the group. Following strategies contribute to the involvement of students in group activities. We want to question students frequently. Asking questions is a great way to get students to explain things to us. When they can explain something to us and they are correct, then they have probably learned that. We can ask students to respond in unison. Okay, everybody, what's this? We can ask students to respond randomly, right? Just popcorn. We can ensure that all students participate. In my view, asking students to respond randomly is the surest way to ensure that all students participate. And it's something that I practice. Anybody who's been in one of my classes knows I'm constantly looking around, trying to make sure I got everyone included in an activity that we were doing. And it's challenging. Another group strategy is to use signals and prompts to indicate transitions to new activities. So we can use verbal signals, verbal prompts, or nonverbal. A lot of classrooms with younger kids have different hand signals that they use, or a little saying that gets repeated a number of times throughout the day. Being enthusiastic. Remember, a lot of people resist group work. I have to say that as a student, I resisted group work. I was not enthusiastic about it, but when the educators are enthusiastic about it, it tends to help a little bit. Another good strategy is to reward correct student responses often. Everyone wants to feel that they're being heard. Okay, so I want to return to this slide just for a quick second, where we said that actively involving all group members entails the success of the group being dependent on all members of the group. This is closely linked to accountability. Yes, accountability is not something that it's not without challenges. It's especially important in group activities. Each member of the group should be expected to participate and contribute to the group activity. Okay, let's talk about ways to monitor group effectiveness. This provides both accountability and the opportunity to learn additional skills for working in groups. A lot of the time, students are asked to spend time discussing the activities of the group and to identify ways in which the group can operate more effectively. Right. So when we as students are reviewing the activities of the day, it helps us to make meaning. It helps us to make meaning. And I want to possibly introduce a word to you all. And that word is epistemology. I'm calling this my college word of the day, everyone. I didn't learn this word until grad school, so I went several years without knowing this word. Although I saw it many times before I knew what it meant. College word du jour is epistemology, and it means meaning making or making meaning, whichever way you want to say it. So many activities that we do as human beings are about epistemology. They are about making meaning, okay? Imagine somebody tells you, so-and-so got very sick. Well, we want to make some meaning out of that. We don't want anything in our lives to be completely meaningless. So if we say, Uncle Charlie got COVID, maybe somebody else in the family will say, well, Uncle Charlie never wears masks, right? That's just an example to talk about how people try to make meaning out of everything. So when you're a young student, someone asks you to spend time discussing the activities of the group, rehashing what has happened during the day. This is epistemology. This is the members of the group co-creating meaning out of what they are doing that day. All right. Let's talk about our role, the role of paraeducators in small group instruction. The para must be aware of the purpose of the group activity and accurately convey this to the group. The para also must be familiar with the planned activity and convey this to the group. Folks, this is the teacher's responsibility. Classroom teacher needs to make us familiar with these things. It shouldn't be a case of all of the activities are in a folder in the closet, go learn them all, right? Instead, there should be in-service or on-the-job training where the teacher is familiarizing us with these things. And, maybe that happens on Monday morning, or maybe it happens in the weeks prior to school beginning. But it needs to happen, not just as class is beginning. The paras should assist in teaching students appropriate group procedures. Remember, we do need to teach folks how to work together in groups. The para should prepare necessary instructional and work materials prior to group activity to facilitate smooth delivery of the activity, right? So if we're scrambling around looking for the pens that the students need, or if we're looking for the papers that we need, we're trying to read a script to understand the activity, that's going to make that transition just so much less clean. And you want it to be as clean as possible. The para should develop skills for initiating and carrying out instructional activities efficiently. And you'll get used to it. The para should develop skills for initiating and carrying out instructional activities efficiently. It's so important I said it twice. Also, the para should reinforce students for appropriate group behavior and for learning. The reason we human beings like things such as video games is behavior reward. You jump on the turtle and you get a gold coin. It's the same thing with being in school. We want to be praised for doing the right stuff. It encourages us to do the right stuff again. And so as paras, we need to continue monitoring and recording student performance, maybe writing it down in a graphic organizer like we were talking about. And the para also provides the opportunity for students to ask questions. Students are asking questions. It's a good indicator that learning is taking place, as long as the questions are relevant to the task. The para also works to increase students' attention and time spent actively engaged in learning activities. Okay. Moving on to a great challenge for any educator is maintaining learner involvement. How do I keep your attention in this online class? Well, one thing I do is I put lots of funny animal characters on the slides to try and make them less boring to look at, a little more interesting to look at. So for younger students, for younger people, a couple of things that we can do include giving complete and specific instructions. We set them up for success. They will feel less lost, probably. We also need to provide practice at the appropriate levels of difficulty. Right, the classroom teacher can help us out with that. We also need to make sure student learning efforts are correct. We're checking in, we're validating, we're reality checking. Some other ways to maintain learner involvement include providing alternative activities for students who complete assignments early. You don't want a student sitting there with her arms folded saying, "I'm bored," right? It really distracts the other students. We also want to actively involve students in the lesson and to use attention to increase performance. How many of us have heard 1, 2, 3 eyes on me? 1, 2, 3 eyes on me. It's something that is said in elementary school classrooms a lot. So one of the ways that we can gain student attention when we need to. All right. We need to fully explain what expectations are for group activities, of course, and for individual activities. But there are some do's and some don'ts when we're directing. One thing to avoid is something called chaining. So if we give someone a list of things to do this, do this, do this. I gave you all a list a few slides ago. And lists are hard to deliver and they're hard to remember for people. In a series of instructions, students remember the first and the last, or are so confused they don't know what to do. So we don't want this sort of long chain of directions. If it's written down, that's one thing, but it can still be difficult. We want to avoid being vague. We don't want to give directions without a concrete activity or action to be carried out by the students. We want to avoid questions when giving directions. Should we do this next? Right? Should we skip this part? Right? Students might think that they have a choice or that you don't really mean it. They might not take the activity seriously at all. Okay. This is really important, folks. This is the order of operations that we want to follow. We want to precede directions with reason. In other words, we want to give the reason why we're doing something before we give all the directions. Students tend to remember the reason and forget the directions if we give the directions first and the reason later. So the last thing we hear is something we'll probably remember. Telling folks the reason first gains their attention, gets them ready to listen to the directions. Okay, just 3 slides on this. We want to proceed the directions with reason. Try using these suggestions when giving directions to students. We can make sure that we have the student's attention before giving the directions. We can ask for a response from the student to make sure that they're listening. We can review as necessary prior to giving directions. This way we provide a connection to past lessons. In a highly planned classroom, you might have lessons that flow from one to the next. And so we need to make sure that that flow is evident to the learners. Be simple and specific. Complex directions are directions that don't get followed. The directions have to include all necessary information without including extra information. When you go to IKEA and you buy that chair, it comes in a box about this big, right? And you have to put the chair together. But when you look at those directions, there are no words. There are no words in the directions at all. It has two advantages. One is that you can send it to any country and you don't have to translate anything. The other is that it couldn't be simpler. You see a picture of a screwdriver and a picture of a screw, and they just go together. We can't be that simple in school, but that's the extreme example of simple directions. We also need to use positive directions and to tell each student what we want them to do rather than what we don't want them to do. And finally, we should include examples and modeling of the behavior or activity and be ready to reinforce the student when they follow the directions. Good job, you did great. We should use praise more frequently when teaching a new task or behavior. This is when folks are the least secure, when they're in unknown territory, right? So we need to back them up. Okay, we've reached the end of day 2. Hope that you've enjoyed it, and come back tomorrow for day 3.